My name is Marian Aldridge. I am 67 years old. On the last Saturday of October, at my own dining room table, my daughter-in-law set a cheap stick pen in front of me and told me to sign a document that would hand her control of everything Roy and I built in 40 years of marriage. She explained it to her mother while she was saying it. She did not look at me once. I took out my own pen. I signed. I wrote the date. Then I wrote the time beside my name, 7:43 p.m. My daughter-in-law said, "Why are you writing the time?" I said, "Force of habit." She took the folder, and I saw her counting something behind her eyes. She thought she had won. What she didn't know was that 3 weeks before that dinner, I had already been to see a lawyer in Collingwood. And what I signed that night was not what she thought she was holding. Welcome to Bold Mom Stories. I'm glad you're here. Drop a comment and subscribe, because the part where a real estate agent discovers the listing she prepared doesn't exist is still ahead. Roy and I bought the building at 14 Sykes Street in Meaford in April of 1989. We paid $182,000 for it on a Tuesday afternoon in a lawyer's office that smelled like carpet and old paper. It was a 2-story brick building, solid enough, with a warped door on the back entrance and a front window that let in cold air every January for 6 years straight before we had it properly resealed. Roy ran his insurance brokerage out of the ground floor for 22 years. I kept the books, not officially, but the way a wife keeps the books when her husband is good at people and she is good at numbers, and they have understood for a long time which of them is which. The upper floor we rented to a physiotherapy practice first, then an accounting office, then for 7 years to a woman named Constance who made custom window coverings and who paid early, asked for nothing, and left the floor cleaner than she found it. She was the best tenant we ever had. Roy died in March of 2022, a stroke on a Thursday morning, in our kitchen. He was making toast. He was 69 years old. I was upstairs, and I heard a sound and came down, and that was that. He had updated his will in January of 2020, with no prompting from me and no discussion beforehand. He handed me the revised copy one evening after dinner and said, "You should know what's in this." The building went to me outright. Clean title, no conditions, no strings. That was Roy. He didn't put strings on things. I sat across from the probate lawyer 18 months after Roy died, and she said the transfer was straightforward, and I nodded and thanked her and drove home on Highway 26 with the windows up and the radio off, and I thought, yes, he was always straightforward. I should tell you about my left hand because it matters to what comes next. In November of 1997, I slipped on black ice outside my office in Barrie. It was 6 in the morning, and the parking lot hadn't been sanded, and I went down hard and fast. I broke my left wrist in 2 places and damaged the ulnar nerve badly enough that the grip on that side has not recovered in 28 years. I cannot hold a full mug in my left hand without concentrating. I cannot open a jar. I walk with a cane now because my right knee developed arthritis in my late 50s, which is a separate matter. But the two things together mean that people look at me and see a woman who needs assistance. I have spent 28 years knowing exactly how much I need and exactly what I can do without. My daughter-in-law, Amber, is 39. She has been a licensed real estate salesperson in Gray Simcoe since 2016. She knows property values the way I know accounts receivable. She is organized, charming, and very good at reading a room. What she could not have known, because she had no reason to think it mattered, was that I had spent the better part of 3 decades reading the same rooms she was charming, and doing it from the other side of a desk with a pencil, checking every number against the line above and the line below. Amber's mother, Doreen, is 64. She moved into Patrick and Amber's house in Stayner almost 2 years ago after her husband sold the family house in Barrie and retired to somewhere in Arizona. Doreen is pleasant in the way of someone who has learned that pleasantness is the easiest way to be present in a room without being questioned. She tells the same 4 stories on rotation. She refers to Lily as the other one. Not cruelly, just careless, which in some ways is worse. Lily is my granddaughter. She is 15 years old, Patrick's daughter from a relationship before Amber, and she splits her time between her mother's house in Owen Sound and Patrick's house in Stayner. She has her father's coloring and her great-grandmother's habit of going completely quiet when she is paying very close attention. She is the kind of 15-year-old who notices things without announcing that she has noticed them. I have never once had to explain to Lily why something mattered. She arrives at conclusions already. I need to tell you about the dinner. Canadian Thanksgiving that year fell on the second Monday of October. The Saturday before, Amber brought 2 boxes of her own serving dishes, a cream linen tablecloth I cannot iron with one hand, and Doreen. She had called me in late September to offer to host Thanksgiving at my house. My dining room holds 8, she had said. Hers holds 4. I said yes. I had been saying yes to things like this since 2022 because it was easier, and I had told myself that easier and kinder were the same thing. They are not the same thing. Roy's chair is at the head of my dining room table. It has been Roy's chair since 1989. For the first 2 years after he died, nobody sat in it. In the autumn of 2023, Amber moved a place, setting there and settled Doreen into it, and nobody at the table said a word, including me. I want to be honest about that. I said nothing. I was seated at the end nearest the kitchen. For your knee, Mom, Amber said. You don't have to walk as far. It is true. The far end of my own dining room is, on a difficult day, 11 extra steps I would rather not take. That is what makes the sentence so impossible to argue with. It is a genuine accommodation and a demotion delivered simultaneously, and anyone who objects sounds ungrateful, which is exactly the design. I leaned my cane against the china cabinet and sat down. My grandmother's china was in the cabinet. We were eating off Amber's dishes. Dinner went the way those dinners go. Doreen told the story about the summer. She and her husband ran a booth at the Barrie Farmers Market and sold out of everything by 10 in the morning. She tells it well. She has told it at every gathering I can remember since 2017. My son Patrick talked about the landscaping business. He said it was strong. He said it twice. I have noticed that a person says something twice when once was not quite convincing, including to themselves. He did not look at me across the table from 6 o'clock until we cleared the pie dishes. Not once. My son is 43 years old, and he sat 8 feet from me for 3 hours and never let his eyes come down the table. At 7 in the evening, after Lily had quietly gotten up and done most of the dishes without being asked, Amber stood up with a folder under her arm that had been sitting beside her place since she arrived. She set it in front of me. There's something Patrick and I have been meaning to bring up, she said. Not to me. She was looking at the middle of the table, the way a person looks when they are performing for a room. We've talked to a financial advisor, and they've strongly suggested you have a power of attorney for property in place, in case anything happens with your health. Doreen nodded twice, slowly. It's just good sense, Amber said. Patrick and I would be named as your attorneys, just for the building and accounts. So if you ever couldn't manage things yourself, we could step in without everything going to probate. She pushed a pen across the tablecloth toward me, a cheap ballpoint, blue cap, the kind that sits in a cup by a cash register. I have a pen. I have carried the same pen since 1989. It is a Parker fountain pen, black barrel, gold trim, that Roy brought home the week we signed the deed for the Sykes Street building. He set it on my desk without explanation, and I understood immediately what it meant. We are in this together, and here is your instrument. I have signed every document that has mattered to me with that pen for 36 years. I picked up the folder, I opened it, and I began reading from the first page. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said anything. A table goes quiet for a woman in her 60s, reading a document slowly, because the only alternative is to look like you would prefer she didn't. It took me 11 minutes. I know powers of attorney in Ontario. I know the difference between a continuing power of attorney for property, which stays valid if the person who signed it later loses mental capacity, and a general power of attorney, which does not. A general POA becomes void at exactly the moment you would need it most. The moment a doctor determines that you can no longer manage your own affairs. If your genuine purpose is protecting a parent who might someday lose capacity, you use the continuing version. You do not use the general version unless your genuine purpose is something that requires the POA to be in effect only while the person is still lucid enough to be managed rather than replaced. The document in front of me was a general power of attorney. I also noticed, on the witness certificate, a paralegal whose office address matched, unit for unit, the registered office of a development company I had looked up 7 weeks earlier after a phone call I had overheard from my kitchen in September. I will come back to the phone call. I closed the folder. I opened my purse and took out Roy's Parker pen. I uncapped it. Amber watched me take it out. She watched me uncap it. She did not say anything. I signed my name. I wrote the date, October 26, 2024. Then I wrote the time beside my signature, the way I have written the time beside my signature since the day I started working in financial administration in 1985, 7:43 p.m. Not because I had planned a dramatic reveal, because I have done it so long that not doing it would feel like leaving without locking the door. Why are you writing the time? Amber said. Habit, I said. Bookkeeper. I handed the folder back. She took it and turned to her mother. Not to me, to Doreen. The Georgian Bay market hasn't softened the way everyone predicted, she said. The building is assessed at over 2.3. If we list in the spring. That was a wonderful dinner, I said. You've really outdone yourself. I need to tell you what I already knew, because everything after depends on it. On the second Saturday of September, Amber had brought Doreen over for coffee. I was in the kitchen when Amber stepped out the back door to take a call on her phone. My kitchen window was open. It was a warm afternoon. I was not trying to listen. I have good hearing, and she was standing 4 feet from the window screen. The call lasted 8 minutes. I heard her side of it. She said, "Once we have the authorization, it won't be an issue." She said, "Kyle's been patient, but he needs a timeline." She said, "Tell him spring." She said a number, and then the words minus Kyle's end, and then she said, "Patrick's line is nearly at the ceiling, so it has to be this fiscal year." Kyle is Amber's cousin. I had met him 3 times. He sells commercial real estate in Barrie. He is the kind of man who fills a room without effort and who you remember liking without being quite sure why. I went back to the kettle. I did not say anything. I poured the coffee and set out the cups and sat down across from Amber and Doreen and talked about the weather coming off Georgian Bay. The following Wednesday, I drove to Collingwood and sat down across from a lawyer named Ingrid Sorensen, whose office is above the hardware store on Hurontario Street. I found her by calling my accountant and asking who she would use herself. My accountant said Ingrid without pausing. I told Ingrid everything. The phone call, the building, what I believed was coming at Thanksgiving, the state of Patrick's business as I understood it. She took her glasses off when I finished. She has a way of doing this before she says the thing that matters. She said, "The cleanest and most complete protection is to place the property in a family trust. The trust holds title. A power of attorney for your personal property cannot authorize the sale of an asset owned by a trust. You would be the trustee. You would name a successor trustee." She had a trust company in Barrie she had worked with for 15 years and would recommend them without reservation. I asked her how long it would take. She said, 2 to 3 weeks for the transfer to be registered at the Land Registry Office in Barrie. I said, "Let's start today." The property at 14 Sykes Street, Meaford transferred from Marion J. Aldridge to the Roy and Marion Aldridge Family Trust on October 16, 2024. Registered. Stamped. Done. 9 days before Amber set that folder on my table. I want to be precise about this. I did not do it to punish anyone. I did it because I spent 28 years in financial administration, and I know what it looks like when someone intends to use your signature for something you would refuse if you understood what was being asked. I know what it looks like because I spent the better part of 3 decades making sure it didn't happen to the people whose accounts I managed. I was good at that work. I was very good at it. The morning after Thanksgiving, I drove to the post office on Sykes Street. I was there when it opened. I had 3 envelopes. The first went to the Land Registry office requesting a certified copy of the trust title for my personal records. The second went to the Real Estate Council of Ontario. Brief, factual, no accusations. I was the beneficial owner of the property at 14 Sykes Street, and I had not retained any sales representative. I wished to be notified in writing if any listing agreement for that property was filed with any brokerage. The third letter went to Ingrid, with standing instructions, no information about the trust to any party other than the trustee, all external inquiries to reach me in writing. 3 envelopes, a handful of stamps. I was home by 9:15. The Land Registry is public record in Ontario. A licensed real estate salesperson preparing a listing searches the title as a matter of course. Amber searched it on November 14th. The office log searches, and I had asked to be notified. The search was recorded at 2:17 in the afternoon. She called me at 4:45. I did not answer. She called at 7 in the evening. I did not answer. She called the next morning. I did not answer. She called 11 times across 9 days. I answered none of them. Patrick called once on the Sunday evening. He said my name and then nothing for a moment. Then, "What did you do?" I said, "I protected an asset that belongs to me." He said, "Amber says the POA is invalid." I said, "The document she brought was a general power of attorney. It becomes void the moment a doctor determines I lack capacity. That is the version you use when you need someone to act on your behalf while you are still present and consenting. It is not the version you use when your concern is for a parent's future welfare. That is not a drafting error. That is a choice." He didn't say anything for a moment. I said, "Your father and I bought that building on a Tuesday when I was 7 months pregnant and a mortgage that scared both of us. The building belongs to a trust now. It cannot be sold to retire your line of credit, and Kyle's commission will need to come from somewhere else." The call ended shortly after that. I sat at the kitchen table with my hand flat on the wood and let the furnace run. What I learned about the numbers came in January from my friend Mabel, who is 69 and retired from Grey County Planning in 2020. And who knows, in the way of someone who spent 30 years in a small-town government office, a remarkable number of people, across a remarkable number of industries. She came over on a Tuesday with butter tarts from the bakery 2 doors down from Roy's old building. She always brings something. It is the rule between us and has been since 1991. She sat at my kitchen table and told me what a woman she knew who works intake at a commercial real estate firm in Barrie had told her. Not Kyle's firm, the competing firm. Kyle had been in contact with a Barrie area developer since August, about 14 Sykes Street. The developer wanted to put up a 4-story mixed-use building on the lot. The current tenants, the physiotherapy clinic on the ground floor and the bookkeeper who has had the upper floor since 2018, would not have been renewed. Kyle's finder's fee was to have been $52,000, payable on closing. Amber's commission as listing salesperson would have been an additional $46,000, between the two of them, $98,000. Patrick's portion, after the line of credit was cleared and the equipment financing on the trucks was retired, would have been somewhere between $130,000 and $150,000 net. The developer would have gotten a Main Street building in a Georgian Bay town for considerably less than its current value. None of it will happen. You cannot list a property you have no authorization to sell. You cannot sell a property held in trust without written consent from the trustee. Kyle sent Amber an email in December. Mabel's acquaintance heard about it indirectly, through the kind of channels that exist in small professional communities where everyone has worked adjacent to everyone else for 20 years. The email said he was not willing to put his license at risk. He has not taken a file from Amber since. Amber left her brokerage in February. I did not go to Christmas. There was no call telling me I wasn't welcome. There was simply no call at all. On Christmas Eve, I drove to the Tim Hortons on the edge of town and got a medium double-double and sat in the parking lot for a while, watching people come and go in their winter coats. And I thought about Roy, and I thought about the building. And I decided I had done what needed to be done, and that was something. At 8:41 on Christmas night, Lily sent me a photograph, a plate of butter tarts on her mother's kitchen counter. The crust on the left side was a little rough. The message said, "Saved you the first one." I kept that picture. I look at it sometimes when the house goes quiet in the evenings. In March, I went back to see Ingrid. I had been thinking about the trust and about Lily, about the fact that she is 15 now and will be 25 in 10 years, and that in 10 years she will understand the building better than almost anyone, and that the decision about its future should have a voice in it that knew Roy. Even if only at a distance, even if only through the stories I've told and the pen she held in both hands on a Saturday afternoon. Ingrid said it was an elegant provision and she would draft it. We had tea afterward, and she told me about her own mother, who had kept meticulous records until she was 89 and who had once produced a receipt from 1964 when a contractor disputed an invoice. "The apple doesn't fall far," Ingrid said. I wrote Patrick a letter. 1 stamp, regular mail. No green card, no return receipt. I don't need proof of anything anymore. I have enough paper. 3 paragraphs. The first one said that if he wanted to talk about the business, numbers, options, reality, directly and with me in the room, I was willing to have that conversation. Not a check, not a bailout, a conversation. The second paragraph said I was not sorry for registering the trust or for not picking up the phone in November, and that I would do both again on any evening of any year without hesitation. The third was the boundary, and I kept it to 2 sentences, because a boundary gets weaker with every extra word. Anything about the building or the trust comes to me in writing. That is all. His door is his door. Lily is welcome at mine any day of the week, no conditions, no exchange required. She came on the first Saturday of April. 2 buses and a walk up Sykes Street in a jacket too light for the weather. She knocked, and when I opened the door, she held up a bag from the grocery store. "I brought the good butter," she said, "for tarts." We were in the kitchen for 2 hours. She asked about the building. She had heard things, the way teenagers hear things in houses where the adults believe they are whispering. I told her enough. I told her it had been her grandfather's work and was now held in a way that would last past any one person's difficult year, and that someday she would have a say in what came next. She looked at Roy's Parker pen on the desk. I had been using it for correspondence with Ingrid. "Is that Grandpa's?" she said. "It was," I said. "I use it for anything that matters." She was quiet for a moment, with a particular quality of quiet that means she is thinking rather than waiting. "Can I hold it?" she said. I gave it to her. She held it in both hands carefully, the way you hold something old when you understand that it has weight beyond the obvious. "What's the last thing you signed with it?" "The trust documents," I said, "for the building." She held it a moment longer. Then she handed it back and looked at me. "That was the right thing," she said, "not a question." "Yes," I said. "And you knew it before the dinner," she said. Again, not a question. 3 weeks before, I said. She nodded slowly. So when she pushed the pen across the table. "It didn't matter what pen she brought," I said. I had my own. She thought about that. Then she picked up a piece of dough and pressed it into the tart tin with her thumb and said nothing else about it, which is the correct response and also the one I most expected from her. The building at 14 Sykes Street is still standing. I walk past it on Tuesday mornings on the way to the post office. Roy's name is still on the tenant directory inside the front lobby glass. I haven't changed it. I'm not certain I will. I'm not sentimental about most things, but I am sentimental about the fact that the directory still says R. Aldridge, Insurance, and that it will say it for as long as I decide it should, which is the only part of all this that ever needed to be true. People see a woman with a cane and a hand that doesn't close properly, and they calculate, sometimes without knowing they are doing it, how much she understands. They decide she hasn't kept up. They decide the details will be over her head. They decide she will be grateful for the kind of help that also happens to be convenient for the person offering it. 28 years reading contracts. 36 years signing my own name with my own pen. One building on a main street in a small Ontario town, still standing, still registered exactly as I intend it to be registered. That is what has kept me upright. Not the cane, not the inheritance. The habit of reading the whole thing, writing down the true date, and understanding that a woman who reaches for her own pen knows exactly what she is signing. That's the whole story. If this made you want to find out who has authority over your own assets, don't wait until next week. Find out today. Drop a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.